So we have a list of points that we'd like to discuss. No, it's not really a discussion. I guess it's just gonna be. All right. So what we're gonna do is have a very brief recap of our experience with the game, with Lords of the Fallen, which we have just finished after about 43 hours. I think we are on the. I don't know what the average is, but I'm pretty sure we usually fall on the slow player side of the equation. So we definitely spent quite a lot of time on it. We didn't spend too much time, however, like we didn't lose too much time in the sense that we didn't really get stuck on many encounters first and foremost. We didn't. We spent an adequate amount of time exploring. To a again, I guess it's hard to tell like to which degree of success. Although the feeling was that we managed to upgrade our weapons fairly quickly and without farming, so that's another thing, we didn't spend too much time. And we upgraded our. We ended up with 7. I don't even remember the name, but the Estus flasks basically. Our healing item. So I don't know how far you can upgrade it. I don't know if we were 1 item away from upgrading it once more. Oh, again, no idea how many more times we could have. Overall, very difficult to say. Like, was it a good time or a bad time? I guess it's safe to say it wasn't great. All the time. We definitely had several moments where we struggled comprehending what the game kind of, I guess, wanted to do. And quite a few moments where we straight up just wanted to quit. But yeah, so I haven't started my list actually. So that was kind of just like a very long, very broad intro to the whole thing. The list is not even in any specific order, if not thoughts that came as I was playing. So I guess they're kind of in a chronological order, if anything. Which is why the very first one is the tutorials. The moment I started the game, we hit the tutorials wall, and I call it as such, because it was kind of a bit of a rough start. I know tutorials are important. This one felt too much. I guess it was a mix of, I guess, not as much. Well, it was a mix actually of what it was trying to teach me combined with how. The what is just like a lot. Like it feels like since the very beginning, from the most common actions like move, dash, heavy light attacks, the classic things, combined with the game specific mechanics, that felt like a lot of information thrown at me, with also a system which was well, for one thing, those screens cover, so you basically have a trigger system where if you're within a specific area of the tutorial, it's like a tutorial box. So if you're inside the box, the tutorial will pop up and it will just cover half of your screen. It doesn't go away. You can get rid of it. You can tell, don't show this again. At least not when I got there. And so I wasn't really, I guess, vibing with it. And when I finished the tutorial section, I was genuinely tired. Again, both for quantity and for how it was presented. I would definitely have preferred some of those things to be introduced in the game, maybe even later on. Also to sort of spread out the novelty of the game, because that's the other thing. Like, past the tutorial, you've seen the mechanics. Kind of feels like there's not much left to discover after that. Like, the game tells you everything you can do, including, the most unique aspect of the game, the lantern, the dual world, and everything. But it just does it right away, and then that's it. Then you've seen the game pretty much. So too much information too quickly, and again, in terms of UI UX, definitely something that could have been better. And I said explicitly, like intentionally, like while I played it, because one thing definitely the team deserves credit for, I think, is the the amount of patches. Like there's been patches on a pace of once per day. I heard someone said there might have even been like 2 per day a couple times. So that's a lot. That's pretty cool. And I think patches definitely can do a lot in helping with bugs and performances and all of that. I don't think the patches can really change too much, like, you know, the core design of the game. And maybe that's not a problem, because that's another thing that's been noticed is the game has been appreciated by many and not so much by many others. So I guess it's one of those divisive games. I think I fall more on the side of those who have had less of a good time overall. But again, GG for all the patches that have been pushed through. Speaking of bugs and performances, I guess I won't talk much about performance because I'm not really that technical. I'm, you know, I think the thing I would notice the most is not like the quality of the image, which we kind of kept low anyway for just for you to be able to stream anyway. But definitely more on the fact of like the frame rate, I guess. And not even because I would be able to tell if a game goes from, you know, 60 to, you know, plus minus 5, that I can notice. But if it dips to the point of stuttering, then that is more noticeable, and that does happen even at lower specs, I guess. It's very noticeable, like during cutscenes. There's a lot of textures popping up during the cutscenes, which is also, I guess, not super great because the cutscenes, like, you know, usually they're just sitting there, letting those what are otherwise, I guess, pretty good cutscenes. I was definitely enjoying those, like especially like in Dark Souls, like boss intro cutscenes. And in this one, you can skip them anytime. And you can actually watch them multiple times if, like me, you end up doing the boss multiple times, which I guess that wouldn't be the moment where you would want to watch it multiple times because you just want to get rid of the boss, of course. But if you want, you know, you can watch it. That's one way to watch the cutscenes multiple times. You just go in, die, and watch it again if you really want. Otherwise, there's this thing called YouTube. I guess they're probably all there. So yeah, so performance, I would leave it at that. I think it seems like they're doing a huge effort into regularly patching the game, which I believe you know, can help eventually improving on that side of things. Bugs, I think not that many. Like we never crashed, so that's also very good. And overall, I guess it would be fair to say that I haven't encountered that many. It's more like, but those I encountered, like, no, it's more like the one I encountered definitely started a rough moment with the game. And that was when basically the game decided to load an object on the map, which clearly looked like wrong. As in, not as in it didn't belong there. More, it was more like it just looked like an untextured item. The unfortunate thing, it was just standing literally on the path. So it was the swamp, and the swamp was probably one of the hardest area to, you know, find your way through, probably by design. And so having an unexpected item hiding the path, and that was especially in an area where the goal was like, it was really a labyrinthic spot of within the swamp. So it just was, I guess, you know, unfortunate chain of events that made it so that I had done everything I had to do to unlock my path, but something didn't, you know, was still there hiding that corridor. So I just ended up wasting 45 minutes, at the end of which I was like really tired, a bit frustrated, etc. So again, not many bugs, 0 crashes. The only other thing I can recall was like being tossed through the map, through the floor and down. But that was one of those, because one of those enemy animations. So I think it's kind of common in other games. I know playing Destiny, I know some people use emotes to cheat and break through walls and go outside of the map, and that was kind of a similar thing. An enemy grabbed me, I wasn't like on stairs. I think that kind of tends to break things, and so I just fell through. Again, not a big that one definitely much minor. The other one was just more memorable in a bad way. I guess it just like burnt me a little bit. So that was for bugs and performance. Talking about what I think are pretty good things. Weapons and armor variety and items in general. Like the game, like you'll find a huge amount of weapons and armor, which can be, I guess, weapon would cover the playstyle. So for those are more into the gameplay of things and whatnot, a lot of weapons to play, experiment with, different visual, different move sets, and again from a visual perspective, very nice variety. Armor wise, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that all that changes is the cosmetic, the visual of it, and the stats. Just so I didn't notice items with special properties or abilities. So I guess I definitely played it more on the um, I definitely used armor more for the cosmetic side of things. Maybe a couple of times I tried to spec just to have a little bit more resistance for an element on the other, but overall, like, well, I finished the game with the same hat basically that I started with. Um, in terms of weapons, changing weapons, I did so a little bit at the beginning of the game. I went from a two-handed sword to dual wielding, to a hammer, back to a big sword, and then back to my hammer. So I did try to mix it up a bit, but I also choose not to farm for materials. So I kind of felt like at some point, if I wanted, like, if you want to experiment, you, of course, you're probably gonna have to invest more time. Um, running around, killing enemies to bring weapons up to speed. Of course, you can equip them and swing them around just to see if you like the moveset or whatnot. But the efficiency and the stat, I guess, is, of course, it takes a lot of, either you go on a wiki to, spike up the numbers. If you don't want to go that route, then it's, personal experimentation. So, of course, more time. So if you like that, probably the game has enough variety to, keep you engaged, for in terms of replayability. Can choose your playstyle in terms of weapons. Where it lacks, unfortunately, is what to use those weapons on. The bestiary is a bit of a low point in the game, but more than just having not many enemies. I think there are two things that definitely made it even more difficult for me to, I guess, I'm not sure what the term would be, um, deal with this lack of variety of enemies. The first one is the fact that there's a number of bosses in the game, which you can easily split into two categories: true bosses, and I guess, I don't know, fake bosses, or check mid boss. I don't know, but basically, pretty much is like some regular NPCs throughout almost every chapter area of the game. There's at least one boss, if not two, that are regular mobs grabbed and maybe scaled up a bit, and with a boss bar on the screen, and you just fight them if like as if they were bosses. The problem with that, I think there's like sort of two problems with that. The first, well, the only problem is when it's too obvious. And I guess it takes one or two of them to realize it, but then after that, it becomes even more obvious. I don't think it's the end of the world if when that is done. What is a bit more problematic, for me at least, is like when you don't give enough time to split those two realities, where it's a boss at a moment and the moment after it's just a regular mob. I think it subtracts. It feels cheap, so overall not great. And I guess it also kind of maybe subtracts from, oh, I just defeated a boss. Oh no, it was just a mob, or vice versa. Oh my god, how many times am I gonna have to fight these things? Because they usually have more aggressive play styles and patterns, which kind of would entitle them to being bosses. But then you might not want to face them constantly in the rest of the level that they're sort of blocking. So someone, while I was talking about this with a friend, of course, it did remind me that, yeah, that's I mean, Dark Souls does it as well. And the example it was bringing me was the Taurus in Dark Souls 1, which is basically potentially, usually for most players, the first boss in the game. And yes, true, you do find it again, but it's in the lava area, and that's like you're not heading there right away. I think it's kind of 2/3 in. So basically, you probably play like potentially like 10 hours or so, especially on the first run. And so splitting them apart also allows, I think, that sort of okay, it was a boss, but then I grew, I had the time to improve my stats, change my weapons, etc, etc. So I guess it makes sense at that point that he becomes like, his status compared to your rank is kind of lowers. And so finding him around again, and again, not that many times anyway, but it's more like, oh, this boss that was in this area kind of came from that other region where there's a few of them. And that's it. Here instead, it's more like you defeat the boss, you walk to the next corridor, and that same mob is there. Just exactly the same. A few, like, less HP probably, but even then, it's still treated like an elite almost, because it also has, like, again, on top of aggressive, deadly patterns, they often have more health. So, bit of a pain. So that was for the bestiary. But the bestiary, and I guess the bosses. Speaking of bosses, I think it could be a good point to talk about the bonfires and my relation with those. Clearly a pain point, and I think that is also not something so uncommon. As in, like, it's definitely a point of discussion. The game has basically two checkpoint mechanics. Has the traditional bonfire that you reach, you unlock, and you can teleport from and to as many times as you want. You use it to go back to the hub, you use it to upgrade your weapons eventually, your character, etc. Very standard, and those work fine. These usually, they're usually set at the beginning or in middle of the sections. Nothing to say about that. I think developers wanted to try and have a twist on that thing, and so they added those sort of, what I call, like, the bed flowers, which is basically what's on the screen right now. And those are basically an alternative form of checkpoint, of which you can have active only one, and you have these bed flowers spread around the world, and you can spend seeds, which you can have in limited amount, 5. But you can farm them and buy them. And basically, there's a lot of them, a lot, but you can only have one active. And when you defeat a boss, instead of a true bonfire, you get one of these. Except that most of the times, once you defeat the boss, a lot of times, once you defeat a boss, you basically unlock the next area, and the next area has a statue, like the classic bonfire from which you can teleport. And so, why? And why was the question instead of getting a nice feeling of, oh, I defeated a boss, here's my bonfire, I can rest, I can recuperate my energies and resources. Like, just a general moment of rest becomes a moment of, should I use the seed to unlock this thing, or should I venture forward? Except you're asking yourself that question with a lot of souls. So usually, I think a lot of players, myself for sure, once you defeat a boss, you should be really excited. And usually a lot of times, that was stressful. And so you just want to have a good moment, relaxing, and celebrating, and sitting at a nice warm fire, spending your souls. The game kind of deprives you of that, because you never have it. There's never one right there, but it's probably just like the next corridor, and sometimes there might be enemies, Most of the times there's not. I can't really recall all of them. But again, there's this contrast and this, it just feels like the two mechanics were not fully fleshed. One was fleshed out, the regular ones, and I think that's because it was fleshed out because of experience gained from looking at other games. This other one was like maybe interesting, but first of all, it doubles down on something that was already there and already works fine. And second of all, I guess it's like it's tentative a twist, but that didn't find its own shape. Um, and yeah, and one thing that definitely confirms, like I've been told and just reminded, um, the original vision was not having the regular checkpoints and having only this one. Since then, and apparently that original vision was also applied to the new game plus. Which again, I believe reinforces the fact that on one side, players and maybe some of the devs understood the meaning and just want the regular bonfires because they make sense for what they represent and how they are. And then on the other side, there's this desire to push a twist on it, which again, not entirely against, but this form, I think, hasn't found its identity just yet. And the fact that first they ended up putting both, and the fact that the new game plus vision with only bed flowers has also been at least partly adjusted. And if I understood correctly, it's like you have fewer and fewer regular ones the more new game plus you start. Again, I think it's, if anything, I'm sure I didn't like the bed flower mechanic per se. I like the idea of discovering eventually additional bonfires that are not necessarily on the main route. That's for sure. Just like I like to find new secret areas, side optional bosses, etc. I didn't like the fact that I had to ponder if that was a good idea. If too many questions. Like if I had to ask myself, is it worth spending a seed because is this an interesting area? Is this an area where I'm gonna need to come back and forth a bunch of times? Am I spending a resource to then have a regular checkpoint just like a few meters after? And that will happen. Like sometimes you will have literally a bed flower like half a corridor away from a regular statue. So yeah, no, not great. Not ideal. And again, tied to a resource that you have to eventually go farm or etc. So for me, again, it's just, it kind of breaks the point, the whole philosophy of bonfires, which are resting points where the player should be, relieved to find. It's that moment of break, just then, then you just keep going. Okay, but enough ranting on the bad flowers. Again, not a fan. Oh well. We still ended up using it though, because I'm also very stingy with resources. That's the fact that I can't hide behind it. I hate spending resources. I really try in this game to do more experimentation. No, I wouldn't call it experimentation. Simply using my resources up until the very end, where I really like sort of spam those bed flowers just to get strategic locations while I was going around. I guess this would be the moment where we talk about, I guess, the level design then, since we talked about the checkpoints and finding the right ones to move around. Level design, the game tries something, I guess, technically incredible, or at least technically big. It tries to have two worlds coexisting at the same time. I'm sure some people took the topic as a debate from a technical perspective in terms of like what's the impact of having those two worlds all the time. But again, technical, I leave it to the experts. In terms of fun, I guess it's similar to the bed flowers, where it's like, okay, it's an idea. Probably worth investigating and pursuing. Was it fleshed out and realized in a way where I really kind of enjoyed going between the two? I'm afraid not. I did not. I didn't find it particularly interesting to like the way, like the general purpose of it. I'm not sure what it was. Um, because I found myself like at first I thought it would be something used to solve puzzles. I thought it would be an additional layer to make exploration um of the levels more interesting. I love to give a little bit of context. I love Dark Souls 1 and for its world design. It's one of the things for which the game is famous is like this. It's one map. It's one map. It's an all intricate world. It's more like it's not a place. It's what is it? I don't know. It's more like, but again, you have all this what normal any other game up to that point would have had that like as individual levels. This is like one world interconnected, you know, with paths that go up, down, everywhere, and all of it progressively unlocks as you progress through the game, and then the shortcuts, etc., etc. So that is amazing. And also, I think what that kind of world design allowed was that every time is like technically it's an open world, except it's not because you always feel like you're walking through corridors and such. Um, but they're extremely interesting because they're handmade. There's no procedural generation or anything like that. And every enemy, everything in the world is placed by hand and with a purpose. By comparison, if we take Elden Ring, which I played, and for the most part enjoyed, but what I liked about Elden Ring was the first castle, like the main first level, I guess we could call it, because when I stepped into that castle, I found that Souls experience that I wanted, which was complex, intricate, tricky levels filled with like shortcuts, doors that open from the other side, elevators that you know you need to find first the other side, or elevators that go up and you can jump below, stuff like that. So that's part of why I play these games, is like exploring and spending time figuring out like little secrets and little areas. Not that I'm really good at finding them all, but it doesn't matter. Like I find the ones I find and I'm happy with that. The other ones, luckily I get someone to tell me you missed something. um Here there is some of that, and I did enjoy it. I did enjoy every time we went back from an area to the main hub, finding this long path. It was good. I really it really felt good because it was unexpected. I didn't up until to the moment I would open the door and walk and be like, oh, I'm back here. That was great, but none of it had to do with the dual with the dual world. What the dual world does is I don't know. I don't know what it really adds to this game. Yes, there is the fact that you sometimes that more often than not, you have to go to the other world to just pretty much make platforms appear that are otherwise not there. But it's not really a secret. It's not really a you have to figure it out. It's just that most of the time you have something telling you you just have to go to the other side of the world. And what happens when you go to the other side of the world is like the game downgrades from almost every angle. Simply put, I mean, first and foremost, you start in the other world with half of your health, which is not a massive problem, but it's still a penalty. And you're forced to go, and you can't come back, not if without finding a statue. Which, by the way, the fact that is when you see a statue that tells you that you can use it, it's like a little totem that you can use to come back in the real world. Well, that's kind of a hint that, oh, go into the other world because there's probably something to do. So that breaks the puzzle aspect of the equation. And the other thing is, in the other world, there's infinite spawns. And so that also breaks the exploration. So you're forced to go on the other side of the world to see and interact with things that are only on the other side of the world, but you cannot explore because you have infinite ads coming at you, which is, they're not difficult, but they will grind your brain. They are fatiguing nonetheless, because when you're hitting hundreds of them constantly, you just want to look around and even look and enjoy the beautiful environment. You can't, because there's always something and some enemy coming at you. And the worst as if that was not bad enough, is that you're on a timer. The more time goes on, the more enemies will spawn. Some of them become even more aggressive, up to a point where it's just like this. I don't even know what it looks like because every time I just pretty much just one shot me anyway. But yeah, there's a point beyond which there's this one enemy really strong that sort of comes there to just kill you, and that's it. So it's like you have to go into the other world to explore, but you are not allowed to stay there. And you can only do it so many times because, again, to go back to the real world, you need a totem, but you cannot use the totem. You can only use the totem once per life. So again, it feels like there was a beginning of an idea, a beginning of an intention, and didn't quite it. I don't know. Was it not enough time to figure out how to make it work? Or maybe they iterated a bunch of times and just took the best they found. Again, for me, not ideal. Which ties to the next point is the lantern, which is basically what we use to kind of scout this outer world and to transfer to it. Pretty much from the very beginning, from the tutorial. If you remember, I had a very hard time with the tutorials. The moment I realized there were too many tutorials, was when the game started explaining me how to use the lamp. You can do a bunch of things with this lamp, but the first thing, my first feeling with it, and the first comparison I draw was like with Red Dead Redemption, which kind of weird comparison, but one thing that was that Red Dead Redemption 2 kind of was a little bit memed about was actions. So in a regular game, imagine you have a horse with a saddle and you have to pick up items from the inventory. In most games, you would just get close to the horse, press X, and it would open the inventory, and for you to interact. On Red Dead Redemption, instead, it's like you approach the horse, then you press one button to put your hand on the bag, then move a stick to open the bag, then move the other stick to move the other arm towards the bag, and then maybe press a button to put your hands inside. So just this to say, it's like there's a sequence of, sort of real-time actions as if that was immersive. And the lantern, to a degree, it's not that bad, but to a degree, it kind of feels like that. It's like there's a lot of actions where you just be like, just press a button and activate the lamp and make it do its thing. Instead, the game wants you to switch to the lamp if you're not on it yet, because you can alternate between the lamp and your throwable or your second weapon. So you have to make sure you're on the lamp, which a lot of times leads to when you need one, you have the other one equipped, but whatever. And then you have to raise it, and then you can perform different actions with different buttons. The mapping is okay for the most part, is true. But what you have to do with it is just like slow and boring. And again, most of those things I wish I could have done with just simply a simple interact. One of those things, again, since the lamp you can use it to sort of scout this other world, is finding there's like sort of ghosts. It's common to even I can't recall other examples, but the usual thing where you find bits of lore around the world, because I think that's pretty much what they are. And I think it was whatever. But yeah, basically you find these ghosts in the other world that you can interact with by pointing the lamp, pressing a button, and basically pulling out this sort of projection from the past that triggers a dialogue and gives you consumables. You have to go to the other world to do that. And so again, it creates this chain of steps that are going to the other world where there's infinite enemies, but there's a bit of lore. So basically you have to go to the other side and you activate this thing, and you maybe want to stay there and listen, but chances are any enemy can, kind of walk up to you. And then worst of all, you're stuck there. Like you can't, like, yeah, you have to use the totem, but maybe that totem, you might want to use it in other instances. And again, so the game has these bits of gameplay and overall design that are fairly fatiguing and ultimately you're kind of constantly forced to deal with them, which I guess, I mean, makes sense. I mean, that's the game anyway. So it's either that or to leave it there. And yeah, and so overall, this few points started from the level design aspect, because again, something I was hoping, when I was looking, I usually try to look as little as possible to game material before I go for it, because it's like I just wanted to see just enough to get an understanding if it could be something I would want to play. But especially if there's anything like puzzle related, I really try to not look at anything. I can listen about it, listen other people talk about it, read about it, whatever. But I want to see, because any image could be just like a little bit of a, you know, puzzle hint or whatever. And I just want to keep all of that for when I play. Um, all of this to say that my understanding was that the dual world could have been an interesting premise for level exploration and whatnot. And like I said, that's what I really like about Dark Souls games. I love the big bosses, especially from an aesthetic perspective, but I'm not. But I struggle a lot against them, and a lot of times I end up spending a lot of time with them. And it's okay. It's a challenge, like many others in the game, and it's fine. But usually, what I enjoy before and after that, it's really getting to have a new area, a whole new area to discover and explore and enjoy in that regard. And here again, unfortunately, this thing of having pretty much infinite enemies coming at you made it so that the going around and exploring was rarely enjoyable. Because even if I did my homework and killed all the enemy in the main world, I would still be forced, for a number of reasons, to go to the other world. Like I said, it can be because you have an interactable that you have to activate on that side, or because you need a platform to get to a specific point, etc., etc. And so in those moments, the exploration was nullified by the fact that you had to go to the other world, and yeah, the other world had infinite enemies. Not only this fact of having two worlds also makes it very difficult to memorize the area. The areas are complicated per se, and sometimes it's okay. I mean, sometimes I can understand creating an area, a complex area, is intentional. Like if you design the maze, maybe you want the person to feel lost in some capacity. Here it felt so a bit, maybe too many times, to the point where it's like I'm not sure if that's mastered, or is it just because just for the sake of making me feel lost, or over complexified things to a point where it's just like, well, there's no way to memorize this anyway, and I'm not gonna come back to this thing. And the game a lot of time does what the game does also a lot of times. It's like it breaks the path in two a lot of times. So it's like you run through a corridor and you're like, oh, left or right, right, and then a few meters after it's again left or right, to a point where it's like, so many times. And again, sometimes it comes together pretty well. I think overall I enjoyed, for the most part, the final area. I thought it was better balanced in that regard. But the long section, 2 or 3 sections in the game, in the middle part of the game, definitely felt like just overly complex, but not in an interesting and satisfying way. And again, the fact that you constantly bounce between two worlds aesthetically a bit different also makes it even more so difficult to memorize. And I think it also highlights the fact that the game looks, how can I say? Overall, the game looks quite nice. But I think it succeeds more in terms of mood. Again, like the hub is a good example of it's a nice environment, like the dark environment that I wanted out of the game, that I was hoping to find in the game. I definitely found it. What it lacks, I think it's something memorable. Like the areas, I guess it's just like not enough points of interest or key visuals that make it so that when you're also exploring, you are like, oh yeah, I remember I've been here because there's this one thing. that allows you to find yourself, orient yourself. That's something that probably misses again, especially I think from the swamp onward. It feels like there's no pointer or any visual thing to be like, okay, I know where I am because I can see that thing. Again, most of the times, a few areas it worked a little bit better, but is that it? I think I ran out of because the lantern. I think I said what I had to say about the lantern, right? So it's clunky, and that again, most actions I wish it was just like one button. Oh yeah, speaking about the camera and the locking. So with the lantern, you can lock stuff, and because with the interaction and stuff, the locking system is quite bad. It's quite bad again because when you're in combat, this thing will move around so much, and most of the time will lock to the wrong thing, including the interactables to which the lantern can interact. But you probably don't want to interact with those when you're in the middle of a fight, as well as some other items around the map. There's like little transparent items that you can lock with the lamp to activate some game mechanic. Doesn't matter which one. But the camera will lock to those also in the middle of a combat, losing track of the main enemy, so or enemies. So yeah, definitely not ideal. And again, most of the time, I didn't lock to the one I wanted, and even getting the lock, moving the lock around was really difficult and frustrating if it wasn't because and on top of that, sometimes it would just move on its own. So yeah, lock system to be that's something that hopefully could be patched. For example, that's something that I'm like, it's not great, but I could see that being improved over time through patches. Some other like I can't expect the game to change the dual world mechanic, and again, it probably shouldn't. The fact that I've had a hard time with it and didn't enjoy it as much doesn't mean that it's bad. I mean, it didn't click with me. But that's pretty much about it. And I think that was a long enough rant. I was hoping to make it a 10-minute thoughts, but I guess I got carried on a little bit. But I think I got carried on because, well, because I guess I had a a few things to say, a few things to let go. But yeah, it was I guess an interesting journey in a way. Nonetheless, it still taught us a few things. I guess it could be one of those things where you sometimes seeing alternatives to some of the games you like, seeing other iterations can bring up some positives. But of course, it's good that someone tries to change the formula. I think that's why some people have also found this formula to work better. I would argue one other thing is like bosses. I mentioned like bosses, the true bosses. There is, I think, visually they're unique. You only find them once. They all have their cutscene and everything, and we spoke also about their difficulty. They're easier than exploring, so it's kind of almost the opposite than some of the Dark Souls, where exploring is kind of easier, and sometimes bosses can get really brutal. I don't think that it's the case here. I guess we technically first tried the final boss, penultimate boss technically, because the final, I guess the one in the other room, we still managed to die somehow. But yeah, it was yeah, the bosses are not overly complicated, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But that again, that is definitely something that different people will feel very differently. Again, for me, I wish I I don't wish I had a different time with the bosses. The time I spent on the bosses was more than enough. I actually enjoyed the fact that some of them were mechanics based more than combat focused. So by comparison, if you know Malenia, maybe you might have heard it from her from Elden Ring, or anyway, traditional bosses where it's really just like facing each other, melee combat or magic or whatever. But it's just about, dodging their attacks and attacking back. I really enjoyed that some encounters were much less about that and more about understanding what was the mechanic in the room in the area to then eventually do damage to the boss. I really like that, and I'm glad they actually had a few bosses like that. So that's super cool. And that's definitely been a plus. Again, for the levels, unfortunately, I came out of the levels exploration much more frustrated than I would have wanted. And yeah, Elden Ring co-op went right now. I'm just gonna finish. I'm gonna wrap this review, and we're gonna jump back straight back in an Elden Ring co-op run. All right, but that's it. Other than that, so yeah, overall, I can't say I would be lying if I said I would recommend jumping in this game. I would say, I don't know, maybe I don't know if there's a demo available, but I guess that would be one way to try it out for probably, but that's always true, right? Probably for every game, because you might want to try the combat, you might want to try the level, but it's also true that it's kind of difficult. Also because, again, if I think about the first section, when I still hadn't seen every enemy, when I was still, young and full of hope and everything, I would have probably recommended it more than I would now. Now I'm much more, I guess, skeptical, to put it mildly. Again, I'm curious to see how many more patches will be released. I don't know what the plans are for the game. And yeah, it's true that I'm not sure it's a game I would pick up again. I feel like now I just need to move on, have a good time with something else. But then who knows? Maybe next time I will do like we said, maybe we'll be doing a co-op run to, just make it just to go around, mess around, and maybe see some of the things that I might have missed. But yeah, that is it. Those are my thoughts on the matter. And yeah, we'll see what comes next.